Frontier towns often carried two things in abundance: dust and gossip. And in the little settlement of Willow Bend, the dust settled quicker than the whispers ever did. One careless comment in the saloon could turn into a full-blown scandal by supper time, wrapped in layers of exaggeration by mouths that had nothing better to do than stir trouble. It was a place where people worked hard but talked harder, and no one knew that sting more sharply than Alara Boone. Alara had lived in Willow Bend for 3 years, ever since she'd fled a life that offered nothing but hardship and hollow promises. Here, she worked at the dressmaker's shop, stitching hymns and repairing tears with fingers as quick as her tongue was quiet. She wasn't rude, just reserved, a woman who had learned that silence protected better than speeches ever could. But silence also created room for speculation, and speculation, in Willow Bend, was a wildfire waiting for a spark. The spark came quietly. A woman noticed Alara turning pale during the Sunday sermon. A man saw her pause outside the pharmacy a moment too long. Someone else spotted her holding her stomach after lifting a crate behind the shop. Each observation alone meant nothing, but gossip never needed truth, it only needed a pattern. And the town, always hungry for a story, decided it had found one. "She's looking softer around the middle," a woman whispered while buying thread. "She's been sick in the mornings," another said in the bakery line. "Strange how she keeps to herself," someone muttered, as if shyness were a confession. None of them had asked Alara herself. None of them ever would. Alara noticed the shift long before anyone dared to speak directly. People who used to nod politely now stared too long, eyes narrowing, brows lifting. Conversations died when she entered a room. Women gathered in tight circles, their voices dipping when she walked by. Men glanced at her with something between judgment and curiosity, as though she were a problem to be solved rather than a person trying to get through the day. But she kept her head down, kept stitching, kept breathing through the tension building like storm clouds overhead. She told herself it would pass. Rumors always blew over eventually, didn't they? Only deep inside, she wasn't certain. Because the whispers weren't entirely wrong. They just didn't know the whole truth. Alara was carrying a child. She had known for a few weeks, though she'd told no one, not even the dressmaker who treated her kindly, not even the preacher who asked now and then whether she was managing all right. She wasn't ready to speak it aloud. The memory of how that child came to be was too heavy, too painful, too tangled in shadows she hadn't yet learned how to face. She could barely confront it herself, let alone offer it to a town eager to dissect her life like vultures picking over bones. And so the rumors grew, feeding on her quietness, her pale cheeks, her tired eyes. People didn't understand her, and what they didn't understand, they invented explanations for. By the end of the month, the gossip reached a fever pitch. People spoke of her as though she were a scandal walking on two legs. They assumed the worst, always the worst, because it was more entertaining than the truth. In Willow Bend, a woman without a man was already suspect. A woman with a secret was unforgivable. And Alara, alone and expecting, carried both burdens without a single person in the world to stand beside her, or so she believed. That would change soon. Very soon. Calder Reeves had never been a man who sought trouble or company. He lived on the outer edges of Willow Bend, where the prairie stretched wide and unbroken, giving him all the quiet he needed and none of the judgment the town so freely handed out. Folks called him the Lone Horseman, partly because he spent more time in the saddle than in conversation, and partly because he preferred the company of wind and cattle over gossip-filled mouths. But despite his distance, Calder saw more than people realized. For 3 years, he'd ridden past the dressmaker's shop every morning on his way to the grazing fields, and nearly every morning, he'd catch a glimpse of Alara Boone unlocking the door, her hair tucked behind her ear, her movements careful and graceful, like someone afraid to be noticed. She wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention, yet something about her always made Calder look twice. He didn't know her whole story, only that she'd arrived alone, worked hard, and avoided the kind of men who swaggered too loudly or stared too boldly. Calder respected that. He respected her more than he ever said aloud. Still, he kept his distance. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much, and because he believed a woman like Alara deserved someone gentler, steadier, someone whose life didn't revolve around cattle drives and long silences. But distance didn't blind him. He noticed things, small things, the town twisted into cruel assumptions. He saw the way Alara held the counter a second too long, breathing through a wave of nausea. He saw the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the way she wrapped her shawl tighter, even on warm days. He saw how she flinched slightly when men stood too close or spoke too loudly. And he noticed something else, how the town's attitude shifted around her like a cold wind. Whispers rose when she passed. Women tilted their heads together. Men exchanged glances that made Calder's jaw tighten. He heard fragments, must be someone's mistake. She's not denying it. Probably thought she could hide it. Calder didn't believe in meddling, but he believed even less in cruelty. A town could be hard enough on a woman alone. Throw rumors into the mix, and it became a battlefield. He saw Alara shrinking into herself more with each passing day. her shoulders curling inward as though she were trying to fold herself away from the world. And every time he saw that, something in Calder's chest pressed tighter, a slow, growing ache he couldn't shake. The moment things changed for him came quietly. Outside the mercantile, Alara had stepped out with a small bag of flour, her steps unsteady. Two women stood near the doorway, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. "Shameful," one said, "walking around like that." The other added, "Acting decent when she knows she's not." Alara froze, her cheeks burning. She kept walking, but her hands trembled, and the flour bag nearly slipped from her grasp. Before Calder even realized he'd moved, he was off his horse, striding toward her. She didn't see him, she never looked up, but he saw the hurt, the exhaustion, the fear. He wanted to speak, to ask if she was all right, to tell her that those women didn't know a thing about her. But the right words stuck in his throat, and he had never been a man gifted with gentle speech. So he simply picked up the bag of flour from her shaking hands and said quietly, "Let me help." Alara blinked, startled, unsure how to react. No one had offered her kindness in weeks. Calder carried the bag to her door, tipped his hat, and walked away before she could thank him. But that moment, small, fleeting, planted a seed. He could stay distant from the town. He could stay distant from trouble. But he could no longer stay distant from her. And the day was coming when Calder Reeves would have to step into the very center of the storm he tried to avoid, because Alara Boone would soon face it alone, unless someone stood beside her. Rumors are like snowballs rolling downhill. Once they gather enough speed, they don't just grow, they crush. And in Willow Bend, the rumor about Alara had grown into an avalanche long before she realized she was standing directly in its path. For weeks, she had tried to ignore the whispers. She forced herself to continue working at the dressmaker's shop, stitching with shaking hands while feeling eyes rake over her like needles. She kept her posture straight, kept her voice calm, kept her mask in place. But every day chipped away another piece of her strength. And then came the morning, everything snapped. Alara had gone to the general store early, hoping to avoid the busier hours. She needed simple things: soap, thread, a tin of tea, but even those errands had become something she dreaded. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the door, praying the store would be empty. It wasn't. 3 townsfolk stood inside. Mrs. Hargrave, who believed gossip was a civic duty; Mr. Pike, a man who pretended to be moral while thriving on other people's shame; and a younger woman, Alara, recognized only vaguely, someone who always watched others' misfortunes with 2 bright eyes. Alara kept her gaze down and walked toward the shelves, but the room felt too quiet, like they were all holding their breath. She could feel their stares, sharp as thorns against her skin. Then Mrs. Hargrave's voice cut through the silence. "Miss Boone," she said loudly, making sure Alara couldn't slip away, "we've been meaning to talk to you." Alara froze, her neck warmed with dread. She turned slowly, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Mrs. Hargrave stepped closer, chin lifted with false righteousness. "It's time you stop pretending. Everyone sees how you've been carrying on." Alara blinked. I'm not pretending anything." Mr. Pike joined in, his eyes crawling over her like insects. "Your condition is obvious. You should name the man responsible rather than letting the town believe the worst." The worst. They already believed it. They'd built entire stories around her stories that traveled farther and grew uglier every day. The younger woman snorted. "Maybe she won't name him because she doesn't know who he is." A harsh, ugly laugh followed from Mr. Pike. Alara's face burned. Her throat tightened. She felt cornered, trapped, humiliated. She stepped back, but the counter blocked her retreat. I didn't." She tried to speak, but her voice quivered and broke. Mrs. Hargrave leaned in, lowering her tone as though offering mercy, though her words were knives. "If you expect any respect in this town, you need to confess. Who fathered your child?" Alara felt her knees weaken. She clutched the counter for balance. Her mind spun. She didn't want to relive it, not here, not ever. She didn't want their eyes, their judgment, their twisted assumptions. She shook her head. "Please, I don't owe you this." "Then you admit guilt," Mr. Pike declared, turning so the whole store could hear, even though no one else was present. "A sinful woman who won't speak the truth. Sinful, ruined, immoral." The words they threw at her had begun to feel heavier than her body, heavier than the child growing within her. Alara's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She pushed past them, murmuring, "Excuse me," though they did not deserve the courtesy. She stumbled toward the door, heart pounding, vision blurring. Outside, the cold air hit her lungs hard. She leaned against the wooden railing, swallowing sobs she couldn't contain. She felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. She had survived hardship before, but this public shaming, this cruelty disguised as righteousness, it nearly broke her. She considered leaving the town entirely, packing what little she had, and disappearing into the territories, even if it meant giving birth alone in some faraway place. Anything felt better than enduring this. Alara wiped her cheeks with trembling fingers. She had never felt so alone. She didn't know that someone had heard every word. She didn't know that a cowboy quiet, steady, and fierce in ways she had yet to see was about to step into the doorway she had fled from, and it would change everything. Yolanda didn't hear the bell of the general store door ring behind her. She was too consumed by her own shaking breaths, by the humiliation burning through her like wildfire. She leaned against the porch railing, trying to steady herself, trying to gather enough strength to walk away with dignity, though dignity was the one thing the town had just stripped from her. Inside the store, the air had shifted. Calder Reeves stood just beyond the doorway, tall as a pine, boots planted wide, with the weight of someone who'd heard far more than he ever wanted to. He wasn't a man prone to strong expressions. He carried most of his emotions deep in his chest, where no one could poke at them. But as he looked at Mrs. Hargrave, Mr. Pike, and the younger woman who still smirked triumphantly, something cold and dangerous settled in his eyes. He set down the sack of feed he'd come for. No rush, no panic, just a quiet, hard decision settling into his bones. Mr. Pike glanced his way and stiffened. Calder didn't see you there. Calder didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the center of the store, the wooden floor creaking under his weight. His presence alone was enough to shrink the room. Mrs. Hargrave's confidence faltered as she pulled her shawl tighter. Suddenly unsure, "What you said to her," Calder began, his voice low and calm, the kind of calm that warned of storms. "That was out of line." Mrs. Hargrave sputtered. "We were merely addressing a moral concern. You were cornering a woman who's done nothing to deserve your cruelty." The younger woman's mouth fell open. Mr. Pike bristled. "Now, see here, Reeves. The girl's condition is obvious. The town deserves answers." Calder took one measured step toward him. "The town deserves to mind its own business." Silence fell like a hammer. For a long moment, no one dared speak. Calder wasn't the type to raise his voice or wave his fists. But the quiet in his tone, it was the kind of quiet that came before a gun was drawn. The kind of quiet that meant every word he spoke mattered. Mrs. Hargrave tried again, weaker this time. "If she carries a child out of wedlock," Calder cut her off, his gaze steady, unflinching. "If she carries a child," he said, "then it's mine to protect." The words filled the store, echoing louder than if he'd shouted them. It wasn't a lie. He didn't claim he fathered the child. He didn't need to. His words meant something different, something stronger. He was claiming responsibility, shielding her, placing himself between Alara and the entire town with 6 simple, irrevocable words. Mrs. Hargrave's face drained of color. The younger woman looked like someone had slapped her. Mr. Pike shut his mouth for the first time in years. Calder let the weight of his statement settle before continuing. "You will leave her be, all of you. From this moment on, it wasn't a request. It was an order from a man who rarely gave them but who expected obedience when he did." He turned without waiting for a reply and walked out of the store, the bell ringing sharply behind him. Alara startled when she heard footsteps approach, wiping her eyes quickly, not wanting anyone to witness her falling apart. But when Calder stepped onto the porch, she froze. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he reached out, not touching her, just offering the steadiness of his presence and said gently, "You don't have to stand out here alone." Her breath hitched. You didn't have to defend me." "No," Calder agreed quietly. "I didn't have to." His eyes softened, something warm flickering beneath the steel. "But I wanted to." Alara swallowed. No one had stood for her in years. No one had spoken for her, believed her, protected her not since long before she came to Willow Bend. The weight of what Calder had done rushed through her, overwhelming and unfamiliar. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. And from that moment forward, everything between them and everything in the town began to change. Alara followed Calder down the steps of the general store porch with hesitant steps, her heart still fluttering like a frightened bird. She didn't understand why he had spoken for her, why he had put himself in the center of a storm that was his. Until that moment, Calder had always been a distant comfort, someone she respected from afar, someone who nodded politely but never crossed the invisible line she kept around herself. Now he had stepped clean over it. Calder didn't touch her, he didn't crowd her, he simply walked beside her with that quiet steadiness she had always admired but never truly understood. When they reached his horse, he turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read, half determined, half gentle. "My place is a few miles out," he said softly. "It's quiet there. No eyes, no tongues wagging." Alara hesitated. She had spent so long protecting herself from men with sharp smiles, greedy hands, and demands disguised as favors. Trust did not come easily. "You don't have to," she whispered. "I know." Calder's voice was calm, patient. "But I'm offering just a place to breathe, nothing more." Something in the way, he said it steady, unhurried, unassuming, softened the coil of fear inside her. He wasn't asking her to trust him completely. He was asking her to trust him enough, so she nodded. Calder helped her mount his horse, keeping his hands respectful and brief, then swung up behind her. He didn't press against her. He held the reins lightly, giving her space even there. Still, the warmth of him was grounding, a presence like a wall against the cold wind nipping her cheeks. They rode in silence, the town shrinking behind them until it disappeared entirely. The prairie opened wide around them, golden grass bending beneath the breeze, clouds drifting lazily across a sky the color of washed denim. The farther they rode, the lighter Ilara's chest felt, as though each hoofbeat shook loose a piece of the shame the town had tried to bind her with. Calder's ranch sat at the edge of a small grove of cottonwoods, the house modest but sturdy, smoke curling from the chimney. It wasn't grand, but it was peaceful, a place built by hands that valued quiet more than attention. He dismounted first and reached to help her down. Again, no unnecessary touch, no assumption, just support. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine and coffee. Calder motioned to a chair by the hearth. "Sit, warm up, I'll get you water." She sank into the chair, exhaustion washing over her in waves. The fire crackled softly, casting golden light over the simple room-worn furniture, a heavy quilt draped over the sofa, a pair of spurs by the door. Everything about the place felt solid, safe. Calder returned with a cup of water and set it gently on the table beside her. "You don't owe me explanations," he said before she could speak. "You don't owe the town a thing either." Tears pricked her eyes again, this time not from humiliation but from relief, so sharp it almost hurt. "You barely know me," she whispered. Calder leaned on the back of a nearby chair, arms crossed loosely, not a threatening stance, but an open one. "I know enough. I know you work hard, I know you keep to yourself, and I know the town had no right to corner you like that." Ilara stared into the fire, her hands trembling around the cup. She wasn't used to kindness without a price. She wasn't used to someone standing for her simply because it was right. "Thank you," she murmured, voice trembling. "You didn't have to do any of this." Calder shook his head. "Maybe not." His voice softened, becoming something almost fragile. "But you deserve better than what they gave you today." Ilara swallowed hard. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something like hope spark in her chest. Here, in this quiet house, miles from judgment, she felt safe. Safe enough to breathe. Safe enough to rest. Safe enough, perhaps, to begin healing. The first night at Calder's ranch was the first night Ilara slept without waking to panic. No footsteps outside her room. No whispered rumors through thin walls. Just the steady crackle of a fire, the soft creak of the old house settling, and the knowledge, unsettling yet comforting, that Calder Reeves was somewhere nearby, keeping watch without ever saying he was. When she woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through thin curtains, warming her face. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the handmade quilt over her legs and the wooden dresser across the small guest room, and reality settled in slowly, like a gentle hand rather than a blow. She had expected awkwardness, silence, a feeling of being a burden. But Calder treated her presence like it was the most natural thing in the world. He'd already been up for hours, tending to the animals, when she stepped into the kitchen. Still unsure of her welcome, he nodded to her with easy calm. "Sit, breakfast's almost ready." She blinked. "You cook." "I eat," he said simply, flipping eggs in a pan. "So someone has to." The simplicity of it made her smile, a small smile, fragile but real. Calder noticed, though he pretended not to, focusing on the skillet with unnecessary concentration. He placed a plate in front of her, but didn't sit immediately. He hovered a moment, searching her face to see if she was truly all right, before settling across the table. They ate quietly, not an uncomfortable quiet, more like two people learning the rhythm of each other's presence. Calder didn't ask questions, he didn't pry. He didn't even mention the town or the confrontation in the store. Instead, he asked if she liked her tea with honey or without, if the guest room needed more blankets, if she'd slept well. Ilara found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't expected. Days turned into a gentle rhythm. Calder would work outside fixing fence rails, tending horses, riding the pasture, and Ilara would help where she could. She mended one of his worn shirts, cleaned the windows he hadn't touched in months, and organized a pantry with shy efficiency. Calder noticed everything. Not in a judging way, just with quiet appreciation. "You don't have to do chores," he told her one afternoon, as she swept the porch. "I know," she said, but she kept sweeping. Doing small tasks made her feel useful, grounded, human again. He didn't argue. Calder gave her space, but he also gave her steadiness and anchor. She hadn't realized she was drifting without. Some evenings, they sat on the porch together, watching the sky bleed into soft oranges and dusty purples. Calder would lean back in his chair, boots crossed, arms resting loosely on the arms of the seat. Ilara curled her hands around a warm mug, letting the quiet settle like a blanket around them. And slowly, carefully, she began to open up. Not all at once, not even in complete sentences, sometimes, but in fragments, shared between sips of tea and long silences. She told him she'd left her hometown because she'd trusted the wrong man. She told him she'd been promised safety, then abandoned when she needed help most. She told him she didn't name the father because she wasn't given a choice, not because she was ashamed of the child she carried. Calder's jaw tightened when he listened, but he didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it, didn't ask for details she didn't want to relive. When she finished, he spoke only 4 words. "You deserved better, Ilara." It was such a simple thing, but it felt like someone lifting the weight she'd been carrying for too long. For the first time since she'd arrived in Willow Bend, she felt seen, not judged, not inspected, not pitied, seen, and in that acceptance, her walls, carefully built over years of hurt, began to lower, brick by reluctant brick. Day by day, trust grew roots between them, and something else began to grow too, quietly, carefully, like a seed, buried deep in the winter ground, waiting for spring. Something neither of them dared name yet, but both of them felt. By the time winter loosened its grip and the snow began to melt from the eaves of the barn, the ranch had slowly shifted from being a hiding place to something closer to a home. But part 7 is where everything inside her breaks open. After months of carrying her fear like a second skin, the world she built around herself finally cracks when word reaches them that a group of ridersmen from her past were asking questions in the nearest settlement. The moment the news hits, it's as if she's thrown backward into the life she ran from. The nights when she slept with her shoes on, the mornings when she awoke knowing she had to flee again, the heaviness of always being hunted. Panic rises so fast she can feel it burning in her throat. She tries to be quiet about it, to hide the trembling, but he sees it instantly. He always sees her before she can mask herself. And instead of turning away or brushing it aside, he stands in front of her, steady as a post sunk deep into the earth, telling her she doesn't have to run anymore. But fear is louder than his voice this time. She starts packing the few things she owns: some borrowed clothes, a blanket he gave her, the tiny keepsake she carried since childhood. Her hands shake so badly she drops half of it. The rancher steps into the room and, without saying a word, takes her hands in his. It's the first time she realizes his hands tremble too, not with fear, but with the effort of letting her choose, because he wants her to stay, maybe more than he's ever wanted anything. But he refuses to cage her. She expects him to tell her she's overreacting, or that they can defend the ranch easily. Instead, he does the opposite. He opens the door for her. He gives her permission to leave if that's what her heart decides. That simple gesture, his willingness to lose her rather than trap her, cuts deeper than any threat she has ever faced. In that doorway, she tells him the truth she has carried for years, how the men chasing her were just trying to drag her back. They wanted to silence her after she witnessed something she was never meant to see. How she ran with nothing but instinct and desperation. How she stopped trusting people because trusting had always led to betrayal. She expects him to look at her differently after all of that. But he doesn't. Instead, he steps forward, cups her face with both hands, and tells her something she never expected to hear. You're not a burden, you're not trouble, you're someone worth standing between. No one has ever said words like that to her. Not once in her entire life. That night, he prepares for the possibility of a fight, but not with bluster or bravado. He moves through the ranch deliberately, checking gates, settling the animals, loading the rifle he normally keeps stored. She sees all of it and realizes he isn't doing it out of obligation. He is doing it because he has already chosen to guard her, chosen to stand with her, chosen to make the danger his too. And for the first time since she ran, she feels something stronger than fear. She feels claimed, defended, cherished. Part 7 ends with her quietly closing the door, again, not to leave, but to step back toward him. She isn't running anymore. Not from him. And not from herself. Dawn rises slow and red over the ranch. On the morning everything comes to a head. She wakes before the sun, heart pounding, listening to the silence. It is too still, too expectant. She steps outside to find him already saddled, rifle within reach, jaw set with the quiet certainty of a man who decided long ago what he would die protecting. When he looks at her, there is no fear, no hesitation, only the same calm he showed the day he found her shaking in the shadows of his barn and told her she was safe. But today is different. Today, the danger is no longer distant. Dust rises on the far ridge. Riders, the very men who once controlled her life, now coming to take her back. Only this time, she is not alone. She feels a tremor run through her, not of fear, but of the unbearable thought that he might get hurt because of her. She steps in front of him, begging him not to do this. Not to stand between her and the ghosts that chased her across half the frontier. Her voice breaks when she tells him she isn't worth dying for. His answer is the softest thing she has ever heard. You're worth living for, and that's why I'm still here. The words hit harder than any threat. They take the weight she's carried for years and scatter it like leaves in the wind. The riders thunder closer, shouting demands that scrape the morning air. He stands tall, shoulders squared, body angled slightly so she is behind him. He doesn't lift the rifle yet. He gives them a chance to turn back. But when they threaten her, when they spit her name like something they own, something inside him shudders closed. His voice drops low and final as a closing gate. She's my wife. And with that single sentence, he draws a line in the dirt that no man alive will cross without consequence. The confrontation is sharp and swift, more bark and posturing than true violence. The men had expected a terrified runaway. Not a woman protected by a rancher with a reputation for stubbornness and a gun he knows how to use. When they see he is prepared to stand his ground and that the law in town already knows she sought refuge on his land, they hesitate. They leave with curses and threats, but not courage. Dust settles behind them as they retreat, smaller now. Their power broken the moment someone finally met their cruelty with unwavering strength. When the danger fades into the horizon, her knees buckle. He is there before she falls, catching her the same way he did the night he first found her hiding. Only now she clings to him, not out of fear, but out of the overwhelming realization that she finally has something she never dreamed of. Safety home, someone who would not sell her, abandon her, or hand her back. Someone who stood in front of her, behind her, beside her everywhere she needed him. That evening, the ranch feels different, quieter, settled, complete. She walks through the barn, where everything began, her fingers brushing the wood where she once curled up, small and terrified. Tears prick her eyes not from sadness, but from the miracle that she is not that girl anymore. She steps out into the fading light and finds him waiting by the fence. He reaches for her like it is the most natural thing in the world. "I don't want to hide in your barn," she whispers. "Not anymore." "Good," he murmurs, pulling her against his chest. "Because you don't belong in the shadows. You belong with me." And for the first time in her life, she believes it fully, fiercely, completely. The past no longer owns her. Fear no longer rules her. She has a place, a protector, and a love forged in the quiet bravery of two people who found each other when the world tried to break them. She isn't running anymore. She's home.